Now, it is week 11, end of week 10 in our class, and I'm going to talk about the Learn Together output that I saw in a few minutes. But before I do, just to kind of set the tone for where we're at in this class, is we are 2 weeks away from your next dev projects, right? So for creating something and then coming in for code reviews. So just kind of let that sink in. And what I was grateful about this week is that several of you came to see me either during my office hours or at a meeting that we arranged. So it is a great time to come talk to me about this. Even if you don't have code yet and you just want to kind of banter some ideas about, and especially, and I said this last week, and several of you caught it, especially if you're changing your topic. And I put it on the code review requirements, is that if you're changing your topic, you at least need to come talk to me before then. And really the only reason I do this is to make sure you're not biting off too big of a project, because that alone can get frustrating, is doing that. Okay. So just FYI, I'm going to, when I turn to the screen and start looking at a few things in a minute, I'm going to go over the thing that I showed you right after our first Dev Zero, which was my example. But today I also posted it in the public repo so that you can also take a look at it. And I'm just going to walk through part of it just to give you, again, that sense of what you need to do, because as you watch week 11 Learn Together, I've only added one new requirement. And if you haven't caught the idea that on the Learn Togethers right now, I've been using last semester's recordings. The only requirement I changed was that you use DevTools. So I'm going to just walk you through briefly some first couple of steps to give you an idea of what I would want to see, or what I want to hear, and what I want you to understand when you go through your code. Because the first thing we'll do is just look, did it work? Does it work? Does it create the output that you desire? Does it meet the requirements? And then we'll go through and have you walk through it, part of your code, depending on how much there is with DevTools. Okay, so as we move into week 11, a couple things I want you to keep in mind. One is that for me, next week's going to be a little different. I'm going to be traveling next week for two days. So, but that doesn't really mean this class changes, because I still do my office hours, and if I can meet with you, I still will. It's just a matter of coming into office hours if that works, or connecting with me and arranging a time that works for both of us. So I just want you to know, even though, and I'm just telling you in case something happens and you're trying to reach out to me and I don't get back to you, maybe as soon as you've gotten used to, that may be why. Okay. Okay. So just FYI. And then the week after that will be our dev. And the thing is, and here's what is important to kind of keep in your mind, what you just finished with the code along for this week is really everything you would need to implement Dev 1. The only additional thing I've added, which is the arrow functions. And you're going to learn about the arrow functions starting in week 11. And it's not really a change in the way a function works. It's just the way we write it. It does change some of the functionality as far as if you're using objects and you're using the this reference. But other than that, it's just a shorter way of writing. And I think conciseness in this case can be good, but it also can be a little confusing until you get used to them. Okay? All right. So in way of talking about the week 10 Learn Together output that I saw, and the thing is, I talked about this last week around the UUID and the reference, because if you're using the link, it's basically a shortened URL that Andrew gave, everyone that used that actually their code for week 10 did not work. Okay. So here's what I'm going to show. I'm going to show you just again, and I recommend going back and watching week 9 attendance, because I talk about this, but I recommend actually copying the code for the UUID and putting it on your local system for our purposes. And if you did week 10 and I marked you off for that part, I'm going to let you fix it because I want you to fix it. And it's an important thing because I want to see the changes that you did for that. Okay? Okay, I'm gonna end this video after I talk about all this with, and I'm saying it here so I don't forget, one important change I'm gonna make to the attendance points. Okay, so hang in there for that. So what I've done is I've put my code out for Dev 1 out on public. And just be clear, when you do this work, you'll be doing it out on your private. And when you're doing it on the private, and we ran into this for Dev 0, as just a reminder, you don't have to give me the links for GitHack because the GitHack links will not work. And I recommend just running it locally. And what I do is once you submit your dev, okay, and it should be, it'll be, and I put dev examples, but it should be in your public repo, in your private repo. And I'm talking about when you submit this code, okay, under dev and then dev 1 and then your code. And I do want it like the subdirectory in JS. So all your JS goes there, any images there. You do need some CSS. And I ended up doing what's called a to-do.md file, which is really, actually I finished all these, just things I needed to do to complete my code. Okay, so just to be clear, right? Because I want you to, because I don't want that to happen again when you do that. Okay, now for this demonstration, I am going to use GitHack because I'm giving you access to my code. Okay, and I want you to have it at least as another reference for code. Now, again, I don't want to see the way I've done something implemented in your code, and I'm guessing you wouldn't, but I just want to be able to say that. So what I've done first before I start, and this relates to week 9, is that in my JS, I have copied all that content, all that code from the UUID, and I'm not referencing out on the web anywhere, and I recommend you do that. Again, this is not code that you've written, and you can actually just take, because you can do the same thing that I'm doing here, and I recommend you do it to grab this if you didn't. I think I saw that Jason actually had found out where the shortened URL was resolved to, which is unpacked. You could take a look at that, but again, I recommend just copying this UUID file locally, and then in your index file, you would have a reference at the bottom to that UUID, okay? So that would be in your script in the end of your, towards the bottom of your index file. Okay, so that relates to week 9. Now for my code, right? And this is good. When you load what you ever have, you have on scripts, they actually will show up here. So don't forget, you go to sources. And when you're in sources, right, you can come here. I'm going to close these because what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my app, which hopefully you know the idea of reorganizing your code to where you have all your functions in one and your app stuff that handles most of your setups of constants to point to the DOM, and then some global variables, and then the event listeners is really the most of what you have here. So I am going to set a breakpoint right here so that I can walk through what happens when a user clicks the event on the image for scissors. Okay, so scissor click, right, is the, if I come up here and I do scissor click, it points to this image. Okay, so I'm going to come down here and I am going to put in my name. That way when it would get there, right? So as soon as I click, and that's what I'd want you to do, is find a very beginning starting point of your code, put a breakpoint, and then actually click, and this starts your debug tools now running, because what's happened here is that now we've halted. The program is halted, and it's sitting here waiting for the next thing, the next line of code to be executed. And remember, I showed you, did I click on that? Oh, I didn't click. I'm like, what happened there? Okay, so now I did click. I guess something else happened. So So what I'm looking at here is I have an event. I am pointing to this image through document get element by ID. I'm adding an event listener. I'm listening for a click event. And by the way, this actually is what you're going to learn this week about rewriting these as arrow functions. I noticed this one wasn't, so that's something I'll do to have this updated. And then I'm saying if player is equal to empty string, which in this case, this is checking for this input box to see if nothing is in there, meaning you can't play until you have a player name. But in this case, if I just step into it, because I filled in that box with some content, okay, it now has that. Matter of fact, you can look here and see, I can roll over the player variable, which actually comes, if you look up here, because I've defined it globally, okay, because I need it in several places. So because I have defined that, it drops to the else branch, and it says, now we're going to play game. I'm going to pass it to player, and I'm going to pass the scissors. Now in this case, I didn't have to pass it to player because it's global, but I just thought it'd be more clean to understand what is needed in this play game function. So when I hit step, then we step into that function. The first thing you can see is that it's passing the player. And now instead of the string scissors, it's actually locally scoped a variable called player choice. And so that's the function call, play game. And now we've passed these things into it. Again, we have arguments that become parameters. And then we say, okay, I'm going to clear some output, and what that means is whatever the game outcome was, the RPS, rock, scissors, paper outcome from before, because if you play multiple times, I want to clear it. Now I'm going to step into here. I'm going to call another function, but before I call that function, I actually call it. So what this is you can see by calling this function, the result that comes back then gets passed to here. So I'm going to call get random. Okay, so I'm passing in a min and a max. And what this is just going to return. There we go. So we can see what gets returned. It's a little harder to see what gets returned, but that actually is what's in here now that gets passed to game choice. And actually what's cool in game choice, we can actually see more clearly what came out of the random, which is the choice as an integer. And then we're going to run through this, which is the idea of the rock, scissors, paper converting to, right, now that it's an integer based on that integer of 0, 1, or 2, then, or actually 0, 2, and then 1. I'm not sure why I did it that way, but whichever way, it returns a string. Okay. So it's basically just taking that random and converting it into the string so I can use that for my code. And now that comes back, and that actually gets, let's go back here. Now I jumped over that a little bit. So that came back as game choice. And now I'm going to run get result by passing player, game choice, which I got from up here, and the player choice, which I know from before is scissors. Okay. So then I'm going to jump into that. Okay, so I'm going to call that. This is the logic actually for the rock, scissors, paper. Okay, good. So now I'm going to read. So by the way, that right there, and I clicked over it too fast, but notice what happened. A couple things here is that it actually brought up the moments because I clicked a little further ahead, because moments is actually what's getting called in order to grab that timestamp. And so you don't have to go over this code. It's not necessary. So what you can do here is you can step out of the current function and it'll take you back to here. So anytime the dev tools drops you into something that's not yours, okay, which most likely is the moments and the UUID, then you can just do the step out to drop back to your code, because I don't need you to explain the other code, although it is good to explain it at some point in the future. So now I'm doing the moments again. So I'm going to step out of that. Cool. So I'm going to step into this. I'll step out of that. There we go. So then it called that UUID, creating that UUID, and now it's going to push the results, right? So actually it's going to push ID, player, results, player, choice, game, and timestamp, right? It's pushing these into the memory, not into local storage yet, okay? Because this is just pushing it into this gameplay, which is an array of objects in this case. So it's push is an array method. And in this case, we're pushing this object into that array. And again, this is pushing it into the memory of the computer. It'll be the next step where, and by the way, it actually shows you here. And the reason that doesn't have a key and a value, because I want my key and my value to be the same identifier, meaning this, I can just abbreviate these by saying, and he talks about this, just having ID, player, and result. So it really means ID : ID. So now what I do, right? So hopefully you're getting the idea, right? So you want to have enough verbiage here to be able to talk about what your code is doing. You won't have to do all of it, but you'll have to do definitely some of it, right? And you know, you can make some notes, but really it's what I'm looking for is how well did you first, did you get some working code? How well can you talk about this? Because this is an important part, as you've heard me harp on. This class is learning how to actually take what you're learning from the Udemy course, right? Write some code and then talk about it. And I understand that this takes some work. For that, I don't feel bad, but I do understand that it takes a certain amount of focus. So I'm hoping this what I'm doing here gives you a better idea about what you need to be prepared to do, but maybe you have a better idea after our dev 0. Okay, so now I'm going to call local storage. I'm going to set the item, right? For this is the key for my item. I'm going to stringify my gameplay, okay? And that's what is putting it in local storage, right? Now, and by the way, it's actually updating because if I've played multiple games, that gameplay has that. That's a function that we saw earlier. And now let's see, where am I at in my code? Yeah, so now I'm back here because I've called get result. And now I have the result of the gameplay, which is scissors cuts rock, paper wins. And now I'm going to update the DOM. So now my code is actually going to reach out and I'm going to see that resulting string get presented to by appending the child, something we've seen several times, but appending an H1 there. And then I'm going to call render game detail by passing the gameplay detail with the player. And this is where we're going to call some other, and by the way, notice what file we're in. We're in the functions here. So now I'm going to call filter this, right? I'm going to do some logic based on if there's nothing in there, right? I present nothing. Otherwise, it's going to actually update. And this is what it's doing, is it's updating this right here to show the summary of that. Okay. So I don't want to make this too long, but I wanted to give you an idea. And again, now that you've looked, you can see my code. You can walk through DevTools, see if you have some questions, and that's a good reason to come see me if you want to walk through some of this code to talk about it. You want to brainstorm your ideas or way you're going to approach this, right? So hopefully that helps. Let me know if that helps. But here's what I want to, this is the thing I had kind of teased at the beginning. What I'm noticing is I'm not getting everybody applying to the attendance. So here's what I'm going to incentivize. We'll see if it's an incentive. Is that normally late work is reduced 25%. So if in a week you don't get to the work, but you do the attendance, then I'm going to give you half of those points for that week. So let's do the scenario. Let's say, and in this coming week, week 11, that for some reason you're running late, you don't get the week 11 code up done on time. You do it the day after, which is now late, 25 points off. But during this week, or, maybe you get it done, let's say next week. I hope not, because next week's dev, but let's just in the scenario say it's next week. If you have done attendance for this week, now in order to do attendance, it's open from Friday to the following Friday. Okay. And in that case, if you haven't done one of the items or maybe both, I'm going to give you half of the late points back because you did attendance. That's how important attendance is, because not only is it showing me you're here, but I'm actually going over things that will help you understand the dev, what I'm looking for, answer some questions about the whole UUID thing. So I'm just trying to incentivize you. So in your reply, you have any questions about my walkthrough of the code? Do you have any clarifications as far as my new, it's going to be an informal policy, but again, if you don't get to something, but you do the attendance for that week, you qualify for half the points back. Okay, peace out. Have a great week 11. I will be releasing next week the sign up schedule for I'll probably record a short video for that before I head out on my road trip again. Just because I'm traveling doesn't mean I'm not answering questions. So have a great week, everyone. It's beautiful in California. Let's enjoy it while we have it.